Zzzpedia presents Nighttime Knowledge. The Grand Canyon. Stand at the edge and look down. The ground drops away. Not gradually, not like a hillside or a valley, but all at once. A mile of open air between where you stand and the thin ribbon of brown water at the bottom. On a clear winter day, the visibility from the rim can stretch 160 miles across the Colorado Plateau. But your eyes are drawn downward, not outward. The walls are banded in color, pale cream limestone at the rim, then a buff-colored sandstone below it, then the red of the red wall limestone, stained that color by iron oxide washing down from the layers above. Deeper still, browns and darker reds, and far below, almost too far to see, a dark twisted rock so old it was formed before anything with eyes existed on this planet. This is the Grand Canyon. It stretches 277 miles across the high desert of northwestern Arizona, and in places it is more than a mile deep. The walls contain nearly 2 billion years of Earth's history, stacked in horizontal bands of colored stone. Each band is a chapter. The pale rock at the top is 270 million years old. The dark rock at the very bottom is nearly 2 billion years old. And the river that carved all of it, the Colorado, is still down there, still cutting. From the rim, it appears as a thin brown ribbon. Sometimes it is not visible at all. The depth swallows it. The story of how this happened starts at the very bottom, in the oldest rock. Nearly 2 billion years ago, the floor of the Grand Canyon was something else entirely. It was an ancient ocean floor, part of a volcanic island chain, not unlike the islands of modern Indonesia. A place of heat and eruption, where the crust of the earth was being built and destroyed at the same time. Over hundreds of millions of years, the weight of the earth pressed down on that ocean floor. Heat and unimaginable pressure folded and twisted the rock, compressing it into a formation so hard and dense that it would outlast almost everything that came after. This is the Vishnu schist, dark gray to black, shot through with veins of pink and white granite, where molten rock intruded into the older stone and cooled. The pink veins are part of what geologists call the Zoroaster Plutonic Complex, granite that forced its way into the older schist roughly 1.75 billion years ago, and hardened there. The result is a rock that looks contorted, almost tortured, as if the forces that made it are still visible in its shape. If you could stand at the bottom of the canyon and place your hand against it, you would be touching rock that was old before any complex life existed on Earth. Nearly 2 billion years. The number is easy to say and almost impossible to hold in the mind. When this rock formed, the most complex living things on the planet were single-celled organisms. No plants, no animals, no eyes, no bones, no lungs. Just dark stone, heat, and pressure in a world that would be unrecognizable. Over the hundreds of millions of years that followed, sediments accumulated above the schist. Ancient seas advanced and retreated across what is now the American Southwest, leaving behind layers of sand and mud and dissolved minerals that slowly hardened into rock. These intermittent deposits, tilted at angles from later geological forces, are called the Grand Canyon Supergroup. They are visible today in the middle walls of the canyon, tilted bands from warm, shallow seas that covered the region and then receded again and again over timescales that dwarf recorded human history. And then something happened that no one fully understands. Somewhere in the record, a vast stretch of time simply disappears. There's a line in the canyon wall, a single visible contact point where two rock layers meet. Below the line, rock that is more than 1 billion years old. Above it, rock that is roughly 525 million years old. Between them, nothing. Up to 1.2 billion years of Earth's history has been erased from this spot. This gap is called the Great Unconformity. John Wesley Powell observed it and named it during his expedition through the canyon in 1869. The rock below the line was laid down in one era. The rock above it belongs to a completely different one, and the time between them, a span longer than the entire existence of complex animal life on Earth, left no trace. No one knows with certainty what erased it. Erosion on a scale difficult to imagine. Glaciation that may have scraped the surface of the continent bare. The explanations are hypotheses, not settled answers. The gap remains. Above that line, the record resumes. The horizontal layers that most visitors see when they look into the canyon were deposited over the next 250 million years, as ancient seas continued their slow advance and retreat across the continent. Each layer tells a different story about the world that existed when it formed. The Coconino Sandstone, a cream-colored band clearly visible from both rims, was once a desert, not a seabed. A landscape of wind-blown sand dunes stretching across what is now Arizona, like a Sahara, roughly 275 million years ago. Those dunes hardened into stone and were buried under later deposits. They are still there, frozen in the canyon wall. A desert turned to rock and lifted a mile into the air. The Kaibab Limestone at the very rim, the rock you stand on when you look down, formed at the bottom of a shallow tropical sea around 270 million years ago. Corals, shellfish, and marine organisms lived and died in that warm water, and their remains compressed into the pale stone that now forms the edge of the canyon in the Arizona desert. A tropical seafloor, 7,000 feet above sea level, in one of the driest landscapes on the continent. Around 65 million years ago, the slow collision of tectonic plates began pushing the entire Colorado Plateau upward. This was the Laramide orogeny, the same event that built the Rocky Mountains. Over tens of millions of years, the plateau rose thousands of feet, carrying all those ancient layers of rock with it. Rivers that had once flowed gently across a low plain now flowed across a high plateau, and the steeper the ground, the faster water cuts. Then, roughly 5 to 6 million years ago, the Gulf of California opened far to the south. The base level of the Colorado River, its lowest possible point, dropped dramatically. The river's cutting power increased enormously, and the canyon began to form. Scientists generally believe that most of the canyon's present depth was carved in the last 5 to 6 million years, though recent research suggests parts of it may be far older. What is not in dispute is the scale of what the river accomplished. A mile of solid rock, carved by water carrying sand and gravel, grain by grain. The river did not cut in a straight, uninterrupted line. At times, volcanic eruptions sent lava flowing into the canyon, damming the river with walls of cooling rock. Behind those dams, enormous lakes formed, temporary seas filling the canyon from wall to wall. And then the river broke through. Every time, the lava hardened into stone. The water found its way past or through or over. The cutting continued. By roughly 1.2 million years ago, the canyon had reached approximately its current depth, but the process has not stopped. The Colorado still flows at the bottom, still carrying sediment, still grinding against the Vishnu schist. The canyon today is a snapshot of a moment in an ongoing event, not a finished thing, but a thing still being made. For millions of years, no one was there to see it. The river cut through rock in silence, through a landscape where no human eye had ever looked down from the rim or up from the river. The canyon grew deeper in the dark and no one knew. And then someone was there. The Grand Canyon was not empty when Europeans arrived. It had been home to human beings for at least 10,000 years, and likely longer. The deepest human layer in the canyon story belongs to the people who did not just look at it from the rim. They lived inside it. The ancestral Puebloans built their homes directly into the canyon walls. Between roughly 800 and 1200 CE, they constructed multi-story dwellings in cliffside caves and alcoves, places where the rock itself provided a roof, and where the south-facing openings caught winter sun. They left behind painted pottery, arrowheads, petroglyphs, storage rooms filled with dried food, and ceremonial kivas sunk into the ground. The Tusayan ruin on the south rim, a settlement of living quarters, storage rooms, and 2 kivas arranged around a central plaza, was occupied for only 20 to 25 years, beginning around 1185 CE. A single generation lived there, on the edge of the canyon, in a landscape where the lack of permanent water made sustained settlement difficult, even in a wetter climate than today's. Then they moved on. As of the most recent surveys, the National Park Service has documented 4,800 archaeological sites within the park, while having intensively surveyed only 3% of the total area. Between 2007 and 2009 alone, more than 400 previously unrecorded sites were documented along the Colorado River. The canyon holds far more human history than anyone has yet uncovered. The Havasupai, the people of the blue-green waters, settled deep within the canyon and organized their entire lives around its vertical structure. Their name refers to Havasu Creek, a tributary that runs through their canyon home. The creek is turquoise, colored by minerals dissolved in the water, and it opens into a series of waterfalls and pools among the most vivid landscapes in the American Southwest. This was not scenery to the Havasupai. It was home. For centuries, their year followed the canyon's layers. In spring and summer, they descended into Havasu Canyon and the arable terraces along the canyon's interior to farm. They grew corn, beans, squash, melons, sunflowers, and cotton in irrigated fields, using techniques more advanced than other Southwest cultures of the period. In fall and winter, they climbed back to the Colorado Plateau above the rim to hunt deer and small game, sheltering in wickiups, brush and mud structures, and in caves on the high ground. Up and down through the geological layers, season after season. The rhythm of the canyon was the rhythm of their lives. Their connection to the place was not just practical, it was written into the rock itself. A Havasupai tradition holds that when the ancestors first saw Havasu Canyon, they feared the walls would close and crush them. Someone used a log to jam the walls open so the people could safely enter. They have been there, by their own account, ever since. 2 red rock pillars, known as Wigliva, are understood by the Havasupai to be the guardians of the tribe. If they fall, the canyon walls will close in and destroy the people. Across the canyon, 2 other formations, one resembling a person carrying a child, the other a woman, are said to be tribal members who, long ago, turned back to look at their home one last time and were turned to stone. The Havasupai used the canyon's own red rock as ceremonial paint. When they applied it during celebrations, they understood themselves to be wearing the canyon. The Hopi relationship to the Grand Canyon is among the most profound connections between any people and any place on Earth. In Hopi teaching, human beings have passed through 4 successive worlds. The 3rd world was destroyed. Spider Grandmother guided the survivors upward through a sacred portal, the Zzzpedia, into the present world, the 4th world. That emergence point, called Zzzpepuni, is located in the Grand Canyon, at or near the confluence of the Little Colorado River and the Colorado River. The canyon is not a landmark to the Hopi. It is the place where humanity began. The relationship does not end at emergence. In Hopi belief, when a person dies, their spirit travels back to the canyon and from there moves throughout the world as clouds. When Hopi see clouds, they understand them as the returning spirits of their ancestors. The canyon is also the destination of the Salt Trail, a pilgrimage route in use for thousands of years, along which male initiates undertook a physically and spiritually demanding journey into the canyon to collect salt and bring it back for their families. Every kiva in every Hopi village contains a small round hole in its floor, a Zzzpedia, representing the original emergence point. Every ceremony involving the Zzzpedia is, in some sense, a remembering of the Grand Canyon. In September of 1540, a Spanish captain named Garcia Lopez de Cardenas arrived at the South Rim. He had been sent by Coronado, who was searching for cities of gold to the south, to find a large river reportedly to the north. Hopi guides led Cardenas and his soldiers northward for roughly 20 days before they reached the edge. They looked down. They could see the river far below. They could see rock formations that, from the rim, appeared to be small, perhaps the height of a man. Cardenas ordered 3 soldiers to climb down to the water. Pablo de Melgrosa, Juan Galeras, and a 3rd man whose name was not recorded began the descent. They made it roughly a third of the way before dehydration forced them back. When they returned to the rim, they reported that the rock formations they had thought were small were in fact bigger than the Great Tower of Seville. the Giralda, which stood more than 300 feet tall. The canyon had fooled their eyes completely. What looked like pebbles from the rim were the height of cathedrals. The Hopi guides almost certainly knew routes to the river. They had been traveling the canyon's interior for centuries. They chose not to show the Spanish the way down. Cardenas returned to Coronado. No European came back for more than 230 years. In 1776, a Spanish priest named Francisco Garces spent a week near the Havasupai and described the canyon in a single word: profound. More than 300 years after Cardenas stood on the rim and turned back, an American expedition prepared to go where the Spanish could not, to the bottom. In 1857, a government surveyor named May Humphrey Stacy came upon the canyon during a mapping expedition along the 35th parallel. He wrote in his journal that it was a wonderful canyon, 4,000 feet deep, and that everybody in the party admitted he had never before seen anything to match or equal this astonishing natural curiosity. The voice of an ordinary man, reaching for words and not quite finding them. The following year, a military expedition led by Lieutenant Joseph Ives reached the canyon by steamboat and rowboat from the south. Ives was sent to assess navigation on the Colorado River. What he found did not impress him. In his report to the Senate, he wrote that the region was altogether valueless, that his party had been the first, and would doubtless be the last, to visit this profitless locality. Every word of this assessment proved wrong. 8 years later, a man with one arm decided to go through it. John Wesley Powell was 35 years old. At the Battle of Shiloh, a mini ball had struck his right arm while he was giving the order to fire. Most of the arm was amputated. The raw nerve endings at the stump caused him pain for the rest of his life. None of this slowed him. He had studied at 3 colleges without completing a degree, taught himself geology, and made river journeys down the Mississippi and the Ohio before the war. He was restless, curious, and physically stubborn in a way that the loss of an arm did not diminish. Powell commissioned 4 reinforced rowboats from a Chicago shipwright and shipped them west on the newly completed Transcontinental Railroad. He hired 9 men, including his brother Walter, and gathered provisions for 10 months. On May 24th, 1869, the expedition departed from Green River, Wyoming, and entered the canyons of the Colorado River system. Powell called what lay ahead the great unknown. He wrote that they had an unknown distance yet to run, that they did not know what falls there were, or what rocks beset the channel, and that with some eagerness and some misgivings, they entered the canyon below. 2 weeks into the journey, disaster struck. At a stretch of rapids the expedition would name Disaster Falls, a boat capsized. The man at the oars was Oramel Howland. The boat rolled in the current, filled with water, and was swept downstream. When it was over, the boat was gone. With it went 1/3 of the expedition's food supply and a significant portion of their equipment. From that point forward, 10 men would travel on starvation rations through a canyon no one had mapped. The loss was not just material, it created friction. Multiple crew members documented independently a growing tension between Howland and Powell over the course of the weeks that followed. The weeks became months. the walls rose around them. The river carried them deeper into rock that grew older with every mile. They passed the confluence of the Green River and the Colorado on July 17th. Nearly 2 months into the journey, with the most dangerous stretches still ahead, Powell noted the limestone walls of Marble Canyon, polished smooth by the river, gleaming like the material for which he named them. The canyon narrowed. The rapids grew worse. Provisions dwindled to flour, dried apples, and coffee. They had set out with food for 10 months. They were running out in 3. Then the expedition entered the inner gorge, and Powell recognized what he was seeing. The dark, twisted rock closing in on both sides was the oldest stone in the canyon. The same Vishnu schist, an ancient gneiss that had formed nearly 2 billion years before. Powell wrote that the river had entered the gneiss, and that he could see only a little way into the granite gorge, but it looked threatening. The walls were close. The sky above was a narrow strip of light between dark cliffs. He was floating through the gap in the record he would later name the Great Unconformity, the same line in the canyon wall where 1 billion years of history disappears. The geological mystery mentioned at the rim. Powell was now passing through at water level, in a boat he could barely steer, with men who were slowly starving. The canyon contained within its single vertical mile the equivalent of traveling from the Sonoran Desert to the boreal forests of Canada. At the river, temperatures regularly exceeded 100 degrees. The rock radiated heat. The walls blocked the wind and the sky. There was no shade except the shadow of the canyon itself. By late August, the expedition had been on the river for 94 days. They had covered more than 900 miles. They were starving, and then they reached a rapid that some of the men believed would kill them. On August 27th, 1869, the party stopped above what is now called Separation Rapids. The water was violent. Powell climbed along the cliffs to study the rapid from above and believed it could be run. He wrote that the billows were huge, and he feared the boats could not ride them, but he believed they could. 3 men disagreed. Ormel Howland, the same man who had capsized the boat at Disaster Falls, losing the food, had argued with Powell repeatedly over the course of the journey. He announced he would leave the river and walk out over land. His younger brother, Seneca Howland, reportedly wanted to stay with the expedition, but chose loyalty to his brother over his own judgment. William Dunn joined them. The 3 men believed the rapids ahead would kill everyone who stayed. They chose to climb out of the canyon and walk 75 miles to a settlement. In Powell's actual field journal, the one he wrote that night, not the elaborate narrative he published 6 years later, the entire event was compressed to a handful of words, simply saying, 3 men walked away from the expedition. The day's entry reads almost like a supply log. The published account, written years after the fact, fills pages with dramatic detail and emotional reflection. The real journal, written in the moment, holds the silence of a man who may not have known what to say. The following day, the remaining members of the expedition ran the rapids. They survived. The 3 men who left on foot did not. Powell was later told through a Mormon interpreter that the Shivwits band of southern Paiute had killed them, believing them to be prospectors who had murdered a Paiute woman. Historians have long debated whether this account is accurate. On August 30th, 1869, the surviving members of the expedition emerged from the canyon. 6 of the original 10 men had completed the journey, 930 miles, in 99 days. 2 years later, Powell became the first person to use the term Grand Canyon. Before him, it had simply been called the Big Canyon. The canyon now had a name, and names in the expanding American West attracted attention. What followed was a slow, stubborn fight that lasted more than 37 years. In 1882, Senator Benjamin Harrison introduced the first bill to establish Grand Canyon National Park. It failed. He reintroduced it in 1883. It failed again. He tried once more in 1886. It failed a third time. After his own presidency, Harrison established the Grand Canyon Forest Reserve in 1893, a lesser protection, but the first official recognition that the canyon needed one. That same year, 1882, an executive order issued by President Chester Arthur restricted the Havasupai, the people who had organized their lives around the canyon's layers for centuries, to 518 acres within Havasu Canyon, a fraction of their ancestral territory. The tribe reportedly did not learn the order had been issued for several years. In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt visited the Grand Canyon for the first time. He was 44 years old, an avid outdoorsman and hunter, a man more accustomed to action than restraint. He stood at the rim and addressed the crowd. You cannot improve on it, but you can keep it for your children, your children's children, and all who come after you, as the one great sight which every American should see. During the same visit, Roosevelt traveled to Indian Garden, inside the canyon. There he met a Havasupai farmer the Americans called Big Jim. Big Jim and his family had farmed at Indian Garden for generations. Roosevelt told him the land was needed for a park. Big Jim reluctantly complied. He moved his family out and continued farming as best he could from a cave higher up Bright Angel Trail. Roosevelt moved forward. He established the Grand Canyon Game Preserve in 1906, and then, using the newly passed Antiquities Act, designated the canyon a national monument in 1908. Over the objections of mining and land interests who fought the designation for more than a decade. Roosevelt died on January 6, 1919. 6 weeks later, on February 26th, President Woodrow Wilson signed the act establishing Grand Canyon National Park, more than 37 years after Harrison's first attempt. The park surrounded the Havasupai Reservation entirely, cutting the tribe off from the seasonal plateau movements that had sustained them for centuries. In 1975, Congress returned 185,000 acres of plateau and canyon territory to the Havasupai. In 1963, the Glen Canyon Dam was completed upstream. The dam reduced average flood levels within the canyon from 85,000 cubic feet per second to 8,000. The natural flooding that had deposited protective sand over archaeological sites for millennia stopped. Structures preserved in the canyon walls for 1,000 years began eroding. The canyon does not hold grudges. It does not take sides. It does not notice the difference between a dam and a lava flow. between a national park and an ancient sea. It operates on a timescale that renders all of these things, the legislation, the speeches, the wars over who can stand where, into the thinnest of layers. Consider what fits inside that layer. The ancestral Puebloans who built homes in the canyon walls, the Havasupai who climbed up and down through its layers with the seasons for centuries, the Hopi who understand it as the place of emergence and the final home of the spirit, the Spanish soldiers who could not reach the bottom, Powell starving, floating through the great unknown, Roosevelt standing at the rim, preaching conservation, while Big Jim leaving Indian Garden because he was told to. All of them, every one of their stories, fits within the width of the thinnest visible band on the canyon wall. All of recorded human history is a geological instant. If the canyon's full history were compressed into a single day, the human presence would occupy the final fraction of a second before midnight. The river does not know this. It is not aware of the rock it cuts through, or the age of that rock, or the stories people have told about it. It is water, finding the lowest point, and the lowest point keeps moving down. 5 to 6 million years of cutting, and the process has not stopped. The Colorado Plateau is still being uplifted. The river is still grinding against the Vishnu schist at the bottom of the canyon. The same dark, ancient stone that was there before anything with eyes existed. The canyon you would see from the rim tomorrow is not the canyon Powell saw in 1869. It is not the canyon Cardenas saw in 1540. It is not the canyon the Havasupai knew when they first descended into it. Each of those canyons was a fraction of an inch shallower. The difference is invisible to a human life. It is not invisible to the river. Tonight, in the dark, at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, the river is still running over rock that is 2 billion years old. The water is cool. The nearby rock is warm from the day's heat. The sound of the current fills the inner gorge, the way it has filled it for millions of years. The river has been doing this since before there was anyone to hear it. It will still be doing this long after every name in this story has been forgotten. The water does not hurry. The rock does not resist. The canyon is still being made, one grain at a time.